Our next guest coming on now is Miss Moira Welch, and Moira is the investigative journalist for the Toronto Star who has uncovered many of the important stories on the horrific conditions in long-term care across Canada. And Moira is joining us in support of her new book. It's called Happily Ever Older, Revolutionary Approaches to Long-Term Care. And I wanted to welcome Moira, ask that she unmute her microphone. There she is. Welcome to the CARP Annual General Meeting, Moira.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
We're very glad to have you. We've read many of your important articles and exposés of the horrors of long-term care across, I guess, in Toronto for the majority of the stories. But you have written a new book about alternatives to long-term care based on models that you have seen working in other jurisdictions. So we're welcoming you as this dovetails nicely with what we have presented with our advocacy initiatives for 2021 and the fight we've been fighting for decades, following on Mr. Singh's presentation of the NDP policy and call to action for long-term care and what his party would do were they the decision makers. But let us know what you've found in your travels and your studies on alternatives to the models of long-term care across the country, and tell us a bit about what we can find in your book. We're going to continue to stay on the line with you and have a conversation about not comparing one to the other, but the models that you have found to be most successful around the world.
So my book is called Happily Ever Older, and it's a book about hope. And I am inexplicably publishing this in the middle of a pandemic, which was not ever anticipated when I started this in 2018. But the reality is that these issues existed long before COVID arrived, and they will continue once COVID is under control. So the homes and programs and philosophies that I saw across North America and into the Netherlands, I visited all of these places and met all of the leaders before COVID arrived. So thankfully, I was able to travel and meet these people. What I found was a similar DNA, even though some of the philosophies may be slightly different or the design of the homes might be a little bit different, but the purpose and the goal is to allow the resident to live a life based on their individual needs and desires. So to have a life of spontaneity, to have a life where you can go outside, have the freedom to go outside, even if it's in a safe place, and feel the sun on your skin, because so often our elders are locked into a long-term care unit for years, basically without ever having the option to really spend any time outdoors, especially in nature. I found homes where people are really, really pushing forward with the concept of inclusion for people with dementia. The rights of people with cognitive decline are really coming to the fore. And that was very, very interesting. And that is really growing. I found that most of the innovation was around dementia care, but that also improved living for everyone with or without cognitive decline. And generally, the homes that I saw gave individuals simply the freedom to exist, to explore their own interests, their own purpose. There are goals, for example, in a philosophy called the Eden Alternative, and those are to eradicate the loneliness, boredom, and helplessness that most people feel in long-term care. And while that is specific to Eden Alternative, I think it really is part of the growing philosophy in all of these homes. It makes a difference in the way people live. Another big piece of this, and I think this is really, really important moving forward, is the relationship between the residents and the staff. And in the homes that I visited, the residents had very deep, I don't want to say familial, but very, very close connections with the workers. And because there's such a shortage of long-term care workers right now, that makes a real difference in their lives. These workers have a sense of value in the work that they do. They are treated very well by the homes. They might be the frontline workers, but there's a flattening of the hierarchy. So they're not considered at a lower level than some of the other staff. And so that really creates a workplace where there's a lot more retention of staff and fewer sick days and just greater relationships between the workers and the residents in the homes in which they all spend a great deal of their lives. So I will stop there for more questions, but thank you.
Thank you, Moira. The Ottawa CARP chapter, I'm sure, will weigh in. They have presented recently to the Ontario Commission looking into the long-term care situation and had highlighted the need for what was, Rick, I'll ask you to tune back in there with your unmute yourself, but they had looked for a change to the entire way that long-term care is presented. Rick, can you just give a summary of what your chapter is working on?
Well, thank you, Anthony. And thank you, Moira. I got a copy of your book. It's excellent. I really appreciate it. Yes, Ottawa has submitted to the Ontario Commission a report on transformation of long-term care homes. And it really does highlight a lot of the concepts that were presented by Moira in her book. But I think most importantly is the reach out that we've done to other chapters in Ontario and hopefully other chapters in Canada, and the push that we need to continue to do to make sure that the issues that have been outlined very carefully in the book, but also with our policy people in Toronto, is the importance of us to continue to lobby and advocate different levels of government to make sure that people in long-term care are well taken care of. And these alternatives that are presented really do make sense because they talk about efficiency and the importance of good operating organizations. So that basically gives a highlight. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. We're really committed, and our leader, Kathy Wright, has been doing a fabulous job with her team, and we're going to continue to reach out to both CARP National and all the chapters in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rick. And Moira, maybe just to add to that and looking to some of the examples you provide in your book. You mentioned the Dutch model and the butterfly effect and other jurisdictions that have integrated that transformational changes in long-term care. Can you highlight one or two of the different models that you've come across and if and how you think they would work in the Canadian situation?
Absolutely. I think all of them would work in the Canadian situation. It just takes the will to do so. And I'll give the first example is the one that I started with in 2018 when a story for the Toronto Star. And that's actually just to say the reaction from readers to that story. It was an investigation into the positive, we called it. And the reaction, the elation that people felt knowing that there were possibilities out there is actually what inspired my book. So I saw butterfly in the Ontario jurisdiction, but also down in Atlanta as well. And all homes do it differently. But again, from what I'm hearing from the leaders in Ontario right now of butterfly homes, they're finding major differences in terms of no more weight loss. They say that the behaviors, so-called behaviors, that people ascribe to those with cognitive decline have diminished almost completely, if not completely. And when I say behaviors, a lot of the people in my book who are experts in dementia care say that this is not indicative of people with dementia necessarily. It's mostly the fact that they're bored. They're sitting in a chair staring at the floor for most of their days. Very frustrated in a large institutional setting, big lights, lots of noise. People are afraid, so they react accordingly. And I think most of us get fairly agitated after a while if we had to sit in a room and stare, at the wall or the floor and have, a scheduled balloon toss, at 11 o'clock every day. And so that has transformed itself completely. That is gone, that kind of model of care, that old task-focused model of care. And so these homes are now operating in very close family units, small households, which are actually very good for infection control. They're very isolated. Only the workers, they're dedicated workers to that household, and the family members play a significant role in the care and in the operations, so to speak, of the home as well. So that's one example that people who are using this model seem very happy with. Another example, I'll give you Dehogewijk in just in this town of Weesp, just outside of Amsterdam. That is more of a village example. And so that is a very large, fairly large area enclosed with walls, but people are free to come and go from their very small homes of about 7 residents. And they go for walks, they can go out and garden. There's an outdoor cafe they can sit in. There's a little shop. Just like all nursing homes seem to have a tuck shop or something of that nature. This has a bigger version of a store. So you can go perhaps with the caregiver from your home and buy the meal for the day and then go back and prepare it. But the consistent theme that I heard from the leader of Dehogewijk is just live normally, because people with cognitive decline, as I just said, the change, the big institutions, the bright lights and the noise is terrifying. So if you give people a very familiar surrounding, then everything is calmer. People are happier and healthier because they're outdoor in nature, and their lives just seem to unfold in a much calmer fashion. There's less need for antipsychotic medication, for example. If I can give you one more example, and this one is quite unique. This is a home called Carroll Woods down in North Carolina, just outside of Chapel Hill. They have a really unique philosophy there, and it's a 120 acres in a forest of soaring oak trees. You couldn't find a more beautiful surrounding. There are a lot of people there who have just retired. They're university professors or professionals, and so they live there. But there's a really strong philosophy around inclusion for people with dementia. So instead of, again, leaving people with cognitive decline at various levels inside locked units, the goal is to allow people to move freely and openly, and then everyone is, in a sense, expected to look out for their neighbor. Now, there are also other safeguards in place. People will use technology to track someone. But when I was down there, I met people who had somewhat significant cognitive decline, but they were out digging in the gardens and having conversations, and they were having a life, and a good life, and a normal life.
Thank you very much, Moira. So I think your book tells us that there are some very positive answers and outcomes for long-term care. And I would say that CARP is in the business of getting us to those outcomes. As an investigative journalist, you come across these situations that we have found in Canada, and they're historic issues. How does awareness translating to advocacy with a group like CARP, translating to political change and will to change through someone like Mr. Singh, who was on with us today, how do you see the goals being achieved from awareness to advocacy to political change to those final positive stories that you reveal in your book? How do we get there? What's the path for us?
It's not easy, and I have thought that change would happen quickly in the past, and I was wrong. So I'm always very wary. But I think now there has been a reckoning through the pandemic, and there's a very strong awareness among all citizens of all ages, I believe, because of what we've seen happen in long-term care. The other piece of it, and my book deals with this, the need for social connection and how incredibly valuable that is as we grow older. But so many of us have lived through isolation through this last year. And I think there is among many a greater empathy and understanding of how important that is, because we've seen people in long-term care and retirement homes wither, not just from COVID, but from loneliness. And we know that that is physically detrimental to us. So there just seems to be a greater understanding all around. So how do you channel that moving forward? Well, CARP, big advocate for change. The voices need to rise. And I think now is the time. I don't know that if we held on for another few years or 5 years, if the momentum could be there. But I think politicians and homes have to be held accountable, because there truly is a reckoning now. What we've seen is not the way we want to live. The first wave of boomers is turning 75 this year. They have changed society throughout their lives. And I think the attention now is suddenly turning to long-term care where it may not have before. But that powerful demographic with the voices of powerful advocacy groups can lead to change. But I also think I've been speaking to some wise political insiders, I would say, about this. And they sort of talk about, how do you hold politicians accountable when, as was discussed earlier, the feds and the provinces don't seem to be connecting, don't seem to be aligned. And they discuss sort of a strategy behind that, and talking about, the federal government can bring in national standards and can tie funding to good outcomes, proper outcomes that actually include wellness of residents and their emotion and their access, the human rights actually to live with access to the outdoors, to social interaction, and so on. You can include that in national standards that can be turned into regulations, but the politicians can be held accountable. The federal government, as this political sort of strategist told me, could be free to say and have a win, we're going to do this no matter what. So, you need to sign on, but if you don't, these other provinces will sign on and take our money. So I think there's a way of trying to, perhaps with more sophisticated political strategists than I might be as a reporter, but a way to make this a win for everyone.
Thanks. I wanted to bring in my colleague, David Kravitz. David is a member of the CARP board, and he's also the Chief Marketing Officer for CARP, and he's been leading our charge to change the long-term care minister right now in Ontario, and has been with CARP for, I think, the longest of anyone on the current board. And he has seen the issues over the years, and recently the Toronto Star published the history of the long-term care conundrum in Canada. Well, David, maybe just if you could weigh in on what we're talking about here.
Well, we have 7,000 signatures demanding that Doug Ford fire the Minister of Long-Term Care. And I wanted to ask this question to Moira, but also pose it to the whole group online, that we feel the future of this file is to demand accountability for results. It's not just, if only we came out with the right policy, everything would be fine. So I got a right-wing party, I got a left-wing party, I got a middle-wing party. What's the policy? What's the policy? The truth is, we don't appear to have anybody that can execute. They just can't deliver the goods, even when there is no ideological gap. If you look at the long-term care homes in Ontario, there really isn't a conservative position on whether seniors should suffer or not versus the Liberals versus the NDP. It's a failure of the people running the system to be able to deliver even the basics. And I have a question for you. You've talked to all these political insiders. Bluntly, do they think we've got the horses inside the system to be able to fix it? Because as an outsider looking in, and you look at the horrific results, everything from purchasing the vaccine to running the homes to spending the summer as they did in Ontario, 600 buildings, 180 inspectors, not one surprise inspection when the first wave of COVID died out, not one inspection to say, gee, let's get ready for the second wave. Let's send an inspector into every single building to make sure we're ready. Nothing, zero. So my question, Moira, and I'm not putting the burden on you to solve it, but is it your impression that the career bureaucrats, the people actually managing the system, have the chops, frankly and bluntly, to be able to fix it? Because we're skeptical.
I've heard, when I talk to people from the industry about Ontario, I've heard that there is a lot of interest from the bureaucrats in creating some change. That's interest. So, the seed has been planted. Is there the political will? That's the other question. And, the bureaucrats can put forward all sorts of ideas and get behind them, but you still need your political masters, so to speak, to push forward on that. That's the big question. I was speaking with someone the other day who is in in the long-term care industry in a high-level position, and they are not sure that that will happen. They're still very concerned that it looks like Ontario is focused on developing more beds in big buildings, especially on hospital grounds, and not really looking at the idea of a continuum of care, which you spoke about earlier, related to better home care, better day programs. Day programs can stave off long-term care, and they're for the families as well. They can make everything better for a significant period of time to alleviate a lot of stress for families. But this whole continuum of care doesn't seem to be getting the attention that it needs in this individual's mind. The whole point of this is, at least from my philosophy in my book, is that the current system is a toxic system. It doesn't work. It's a failed system. And so we can add more inspections, we can add more fines, but we're trying to control a system that is completely flawed to begin with. And if we went through the transformation that you are aware of and that I've written about in many different ways, that would change things dramatically. And then we can start really working on it. But how do we get to that place is in a sense what you're also asking. And I think the government needs to see what's possible. I think a lot of people are afraid. I've talked to people in both the private sector and the not-for-profit sector who say, we don't know how to do that. We don't know how to create that change. Or they're still building homes. They're getting funding to build homes that have these 32-bed units that are basically hospital wards, essentially. That's what they look like. Those do not help people who live in them, and they don't help the workers who live in them. So we're continuing to build this very old, what people describe as a toxic system. And if we stop that through standards federally that could be implemented as regulations provincially, and opened up the Ontario, I'll use Ontario as an example, the Ontario Long-Term Care Act, which is quite old now, it's 2007, it needs to be updated, and make those changes in there. And then with this promise for 4 hours of daily care, there could be more staff on site, but those workers still need to be trained in these philosophies. Otherwise, they're still just operating in the status quo. And that's what we can't forget, is that 4 hours of daily care is great, but it's not the end point. It's just the beginning point.
Yeah. And just one last point, and if they want to make clear, everybody online, particularly other chapters, we're pushing this in Ontario specifically with this minister, but it is a national issue. And our philosophy of looking at actual results and holding the people in charge accountable for those results is a national concern. And we want to hear from all of our chapters and all the people online of examples in your particular province. We're not just, doing this for Ontario. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I wanted to bring in Kathy Wright from the Ottawa chapter. Kathy had a question online. I've made her a panelist. If you just unmute Kathy, you'll be able to ask the question directly. Otherwise, I'll read the question.
Okay, thank you very much, Anthony. Hi, Moira.
Hi.
Anyway, thank you, first of all, so much for all you've done and all your pieces that have really inspired so many people to do more advocacy. So I have a couple of questions, but if I only had one, it was really to ask you, our understanding here in Ottawa is that the homes now that have embraced the transformative culture change, and in Ontario, for some reason, they all seem to be butterfly homes and not the Eden model, but they are experiencing cost savings over the first 24 months that is kind of netting out the expense, because everybody says, oh, it costs so much money and we need so many more staff, we can't possibly do it. But these homes are saying, no, we've actually, done it because of all the savings with staff sick time and, the no supplements and some of the things you've referred to. Was that your experience with some of the homes that you visited in other countries?
Yes, I think the outcomes are all the same, really. Better sleep, better health, happier residents, happier workers. So it's ultimately all the same. And to your point, and you make a really good point, Because I was talking to someone else recently about this, and they were saying that they've saved so much money from the layering of all these different programs that are actually quite expensive when you add them all up. If you took the cost of all those away and added in one of these transformative programs, you would save money right there. That could help with the cost of implementing the change right there.
Right. Could I have one more comment, Anthony?
Please, Kathy, go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things that we're discovering, for instance, in Ottawa here, the city of Ottawa has they run 4 municipal homes, and they have put in a motion now that will go to one of the committees next week, that they're asking the staff to present a plan to bring in transformative culture change to the city's 4 long-term care homes, which is tremendously exciting. However, I think one of our issues is, we've been meeting by Zoom with many of the councillors and some of the politicians, and I think one of the big issues is they don't understand long-term care. They really don't, and they assume, number one, that it's going to be way too costly, that it won't work, that they have to build all new buildings. There's so much misunderstanding about this kind of change. So I think things like, your book and your presentations, and that probably, in my view now, what we're seeing is that maybe we need to do more real educational or one-on-one with the politicians, or whatever we can manage, as many people from CARP as possible, to try and tell these people and to show them. There are now 11 homes in Ontario that have either implemented or in the process of implementing the butterfly model, and they're all experiencing better outcomes. So, this is kind of a mystery as to why more people aren't talking about it and why they're not looking at these homes.
So maybe to make that a question for Moira, will this light that has been shone so brightly on long-term care across the country in the face of the pandemic and the thousands of deaths of the cohort, is that enough impetus for political change?
It has to be, or else there won't. It has to be, or else there won't be any change. So it must be. And I think what Kathy and her group are doing in Ottawa has been very, very helpful for their area. They've been advocating very strongly on this, and that's what it really needs. But there are also people out there who are running these homes and programs who are very open to conversations with others about their successes. There's sort of this energy amongst these people, and they want to share it. And they're very interested in the work that they're doing, and they want to expand it.
Okay, I'm looking at the clock, and I think we've almost reached our time. I'm going to go back to gallery view so I can see our people on the screen. And if I have any further questions from our gang, I don't see a hand up. So Moira, just one last.
Brody has her hand up, Anthony. Carol Ann.
Oh, Carol Ann, you didn't make the screen. Here we go. Carol Ann, if you unmute yourself. Carol Ann's in Winnipeg CARP chapter.
I am. And Moira, you made a comment about long-term care workers and the work of value. And I do think that one of the reasons we're having trouble attracting workers to long-term care is that what they're getting from the outside is that they're not of value. Now, other than throwing money at the problem, which I guess if you're a hockey player, that might work. And I do agree that they need to have a good, decent wage. Do you have any ideas as to how we can change that perception?
I think by talking about these options that are available. So talking about what's happening in Ontario with Butterfly. In Saskatoon at the Sherbrooke Community Centre, they use the Eden Alternative, and workers are very, very involved at all levels of workers. So again, the flattening of the hierarchy, you're not made to feel bad because you're a PSW and not someone with a different level of medical education. And PSWs are given the freedom and value to actually emotionally work with their residents in care. and they're upheld for that. And so I think more stories about that would attract people. There are people who are naturally attracted to the caregiving industry, but they become exhausted and tired and worn out by many different facets of it. I'll give you an example in Atlanta, Georgia. Home. This is a privately operated home, actually, but they use Butterfly, and they really wanted their workers to be self-motivated and how they connected with the needs of the residents. So there was one older woman. Her name was Priscilla, and every night she would get up. She would go to bed, and then she would get up and walk around because she couldn't sleep. And so eventually, as the program came in and her worker became more confident in her ability to take action on her own, she brought in her pajamas and put them on, and then she ended up crawling in bed with the woman and, you know, kind of like putting her arm around her and comforting her. And I just thought, wow, because so many people spend their adult lives with another person, you know, going to sleep, hearing, I think I wrote the breathing of another person, you know, just naturally. And that's what this woman needed. Her family was fine with it. And then one night the workers were looking for this individual worker, and they found her eventually. She was asleep in bed with the resident. They had both fallen asleep, but the home didn't care. They said, we just had to laugh about that because it's all good. So that's just an example of the freedom that you can have without the fear of not meeting your tasks, not meeting your schedule, and just providing emotional care.
Thanks, Moira. Now, I just had a note that not everyone is familiar with what the term butterfly means. So just before we wrap, can you just go back a little bit and tell us what that is all about?
Butterfly was a UK-based model. It's actually, the name has been changed. It's been sold since I wrote about it in 2018 for the Star, and I wrote about the Peel Region home that went through the transformation. It is a model of care that really transforms the home. They give in-depth training to everyone from the administrator of the home to the housekeeper, and everyone is expected to be hands-on with the residents. So I've seen housekeepers who would normally be expected to empty out garbage and mop the floors, spending time sitting, laughing, you know, joking around, or playing board games or something with residents. And so it really focuses on the feelings of the individual resident. Feelings matter most, as they're saying. And because people with cognitive decline often revert to earlier memories of a time in their life when there was just a lot more activity or action going on, they work with them through those moments, and they meet them where they are at the time. Instead of trying to drag them into the here and now, they go with them through that moment.
Thank you very much. I've just posted on the Q&A in the chat a link to your book and the discount code for CARP members. So tell us a bit about your book and where they can get it. And alternatively, they can press the link in the Q&A in the chat and enter the code CARP to save 40% off the cover price. So thank you very much for that offer. And just if you hold up the cover, if you've got it there, and so people can see it on the shelves as well.
Oh, okay.
Well, there it is, Happily Ever Older by Moira Welsh.
My book is available at all bookstores, at Indigo and any online bookstore, or your favorite local bookstore, to support the independents. And I started working on it in 2018, just after I finished the STARS investigation into the Peel Region butterfly story. And I started traveling across North America and into Europe. And it looks at the continuum of care in a sense. It looks at long-term care in terms of nursing homes and retirement homes and day programs. And it also looks at the leaders of these homes who are constantly innovating. And I think for me, one of the most inspiring pieces of it was that they're never afraid. They don't get stuck in a rut and say, okay, I accomplished this and that's it. They are constantly questioning themselves, and could I have done better? How can I change now with the times or with new research? And so if they're not defensive, they're always moving forward.